Sasha's the Pleiadian energy that I channel, who's the contact specialist, and she basically corrals all the activities and invites whatever guests are going to channel through me or who are going to interact with each and every one of you. So Sasha comes with her team. You guys come with your team too. Your team is basically the beings that you've made an agreement with in some way, shape, or form to experience contact in this life. And very often the team consists of beings that you might call future selves of you. So another you in a more evolved form that is interacting with you, or beings maybe that you've contacted in other lives or worked with many, many times. So therefore, it gets really crowded.
Ever wonder if there's intelligent life elsewhere in the universe? Well, I have. I've been wondering since I was a kid. My name is Reuben Langdon, and on March 29th, 2007, in the middle of the day, I saw a number of strange objects in the sky. Coincidentally, I was working on the film Avatar at the time, playing an alien. And ever since then, I've been on a quest to find out if aliens really do exist, and if so, are they here with us? If beings of higher intelligence are here, what is their purpose? Why don't they make themselves more known? Why the secrecy? I've asked these questions to many experts, yet each seems to have a different theory. So I thought to myself, why not ask the aliens directly? So that's what I set out to do. Well, sort of.
Love the crop circle shirt.
Yes, I have an assortment of these.
I bet.
That I get. A friend of mine makes them, so here we are. See, that looks, I have my socks.
I love the socks.
All right, I think we're good. Oh, Lyssa, thank you for doing this. You've been in the scene for quite some time, in the channeling scene. Many years, many...
Decades.
Decades.
Oh.
So how did it all start for you? I'm sure you've told this a million times, but...
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's still an interesting story. It really started with a UFO sighting in 1979. I was living in New Hampshire. At the time I was in college, so I always tell people they can do the math about my age by knowing I was in college at that time. And it was in New Hampshire, which was well known for a lot of UFO classic cases, like Betty and Barney Hill as an example.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. So it happened during a snowstorm where this very bright light appeared in the forest across the street from my house. It was witnessed by my family, and it was obviously nothing conventional. So it really was the thing that motivated me to find answers. At that time in college I was studying psychology, so one of the methods that I was experimenting with in my psychological studies was self-hypnosis. So when I would practice it for my classwork, I noticed that I could go into a very deep state of consciousness. And sometimes, at this time, I was not receiving messages, but I was sensing things in a different way.
Okay.
So you can kind of see how the two paths are starting to come together.
Right.
And after I graduated college, I moved to Los Angeles, about 1983 time period. And this was the time when the New Age movement was really exploding in Los Angeles, with Shirley MacLaine's book Out on a Limb, primarily. And that's kind of what got me into the field of reading some of these new books coming out, and many more UFO sightings actually in Los Angeles, sometimes over the freeway. And that led eventually to seeing Darryl Anka channel Bashar.
What year was that when he started?
When I started, it was
with Darryl?
With Darryl, it was probably 1984 or 1985.
All right.
So at that time, he was just doing sessions in a living room for 10 people.
Right.
So it was really like...
And you got in on that?
I got in on that.
Wow,
I was going 2 to 3 times a week.
Wow. Okay.
And Bashar really became my mentor.
Yeah.
And when the channeling started to happen, he helped to guide me as well. The channeling itself started because I had a dream, and in the dream, a boy from India appeared, touched my chakras, and said, "You will be a channel."
Wow.
And when I woke up, it was a little bit freaky because I knew what a channel was, obviously, but I thought, how in the world is that going to happen for me? And I didn't really pursue it. It kind of pursued me, which was really interesting.
Yeah.
So that's the very beginnings.
Wow. Okay. Well, very cool. And then did you start channeling publicly soon after that? Or did you just kind of start how Darryl started doing the living room thing?
Well, it was actually a little bit of both. I started with friends first, but very often as a channel, you need, at least I needed, further guidance and kind of a mentorship.
Right.
So Darryl's wife, actually, Erica, called me one day and said that a woman in Los Angeles was giving a channeling class. There was one more space, and she signed me up for it.
Oh, okay.
So that was really the universe pushing me. So the class was 10 people, and we eventually whittled down to 5 in the 80s, and we practiced together for a year. We called ourselves the Channel Panel, actually, in 1985.
Wow,
yes.
so the Channel Panel has a history.
The Channel Panel has a history. And we started doing public events as a 5 group.
And who's all in the 5, if you don't mind?
I don't mind saying, but I don't think anyone, or maybe just a few, are doing publicly now.
Okay.
There was Darryl's wife, Erica. She'll probably kill me for saying that.
She channeled too?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
She was channeling a Sirius being at the time.
Okay.
And a woman named Pam, and a man named Bruce, who knew Darryl from the special effects industry.
Okay.
And a man named Steven, who lives, I think, in Hawaii now.
Okay.
And then me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And obviously you're still doing it, Darryl's still doing it. Do you know, have you kept in touch with anybody else? Or
I'm still in touch with Darryl and his wife Erica, of course.
Okay.
My friend Pam, we communicate a little bit, and a little bit with Steven. We've all kind of gone off in our own directions, but the bond we have, I think, is still there. It's very strong. It was a really important time in my life.
Wow. The process of channeling, is it something that you have to, in a public setting, we see, you know, the breathing or whatever your process is. I'm sure we'll get into that later. But how does you carry that into your daily life? You know, how does that work?
Well, I think our background was really unique as channels, because there's a little bit of a lineage here, and it might seem like I'm taking a tangent, but the person who trained Darryl was like the grandfather we see. It was a man named Tom Massari.
Okay.
And then Darryl studied with him, and my teacher, Sean Randall, studied also under Tom. And then they birthed us, so to speak, and there's kind of this lineage that happened. But the really cool thing is that at the time I was training, there was a woman at UCLA who was studying, she was getting her doctorate, and she was studying the effect of channeling on the channel, him or herself,
Right.
and what happens to the consciousness over long periods of time if you work with clearing the ego and you really work with seeing channeling as a way to evolve yourself as a human being.
Right.
So they were studying this at UCLA, and that was part of her doctorate.
Wow, that's...
And
wow.
her theory was that, of course, Daryl was one of the subjects of
Right.
the study. So her theory was that if we continue to go through our lives as channels, continuing to be devoted to our own growth, that channeling the entities and the human being can begin to blend. So,
Fascinating.
for example,
Okay.
Daryl channels his future self,
Right.
and one of the beings I channel, Sasha, is a future self of me.
Okay.
So the theory was...
That seems to be a theme.
It seems to be a
Yeah,
theme.
not all the time, but...
Yes,
yeah.
but it's an important theme, and we can
Okay.
get into that later because
Okay.
it has to do with the evolution of humankind and things such as that. But so the idea was that over lifetime, if the energies can begin to integrate, then we're really ushering in a new level of consciousness, of integrated consciousness into the human collective. Unfortunately, the professor died very shortly after her dissertation.
Oh, okay.
So she couldn't really see through the end of her.
Yeah, it seems in the 80s when, you know, Daryl and did Abraham come on the scene around that time too?
I think it was after that.
After that.
Or I wasn't aware
Okay.
of.
And you mentioned the study, and I, from what I have been looking back, at that time I was oblivious to all this work, but you know, we have Ramtha and
Right.
others that came onto the scene. It seems like there was a big push for it, and then it sort of fell away in the 90s, 2000s. You know, it sort of. What happened there? Do you any ideas, speculations?
I only have my own theories. You know, that time period of the early to mid 80s seemed to be a nexus point almost in our history, where we made a shift into more of a spiritual perspective, and maybe
Would this be the Harmonic Convergence?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
around the Harmonic Convergence time.
Right.
Now, of course, during that time, though, you have, in a sense, the other polarity or pole of it, where you had a lot of the negative stories about Ramtha and about
Right.
channeling, and those negative stories really kind of seeded.
Yeah. Well, I have personal experience with Ramtha, and
I haven't, so
yeah. So I won't get into it
Okay.
now. But you know, I haven't publicly said this too much, but I had a, you know, my mother was involved with the Ramtha thing, and I was I was a young age in high school, and it really turned my life in a negative direction. So I was very against it.
Yeah.
And the fact that I'm doing this now,
I know, it's very
interesting. It's
Good for you.
full circle, and even my mother, she got out of the whole Ramtha thing and everything, but she's got sort of PTSD.
Oh, I can imagine.
From that experience, and it's hard for her to even watch my videos.
Wow.
Because of the PTSD from that whole thing.
Yeah.
She's still very spiritual and open to a lot of stuff. So, but it is sometimes
Yeah.
she says it's hard for her to revisit.
Yeah.
To go, you know, watch people who go into this channel still
Yeah.
because of her
Yeah.
negative experiences with that.
Because of the opening that happened so profoundly, a lot of people were trying channeling or were opening to channeling, but they didn't have. I just feel so fortunate for the training I had, because most channels don't get the training of clearing the ego and working on the deep inner levels,
Right.
so that your channeling becomes a process of integration rather than fragmentation.
Right.
Where you're channeling inner voices, perhaps, more so than the energies coming through.
Right.
So I know there was a lot of, also at that time, channels who created a lot of chaos and
Sure.
and cult
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
energies.
exactly. Yeah.
And that added to the perception of channeling.
Right. You know, all of the channelers that I've been interviewing for the series and come in contact with, I'm definitely being guided, but
Yes.
I've found sort of my key sort of, you know, I hate to use this term, but my BS meter.
I have one too.
Which is, and this is just for me personally, but it seems to work. And if anybody's speaking about separation or unity, that's like the key thing. Is it unity or separation? And if there's anything in the course of the information that's being channeled or coming through, if it talks about unity, and if it's all about unity, then that tends to be the ones that I sort of focus on in my series.
Yes.
And then the whole separation, you know, and idea of separation and putting barriers and all these things. So
I agree 100%.
And I think for those who are watching, maybe you know, you can use that as a discernment tool.
Yes.
And
it's very subtle because there's some material also that claims to be talking about unity, but is really just facilitating separation.
Yeah. It's a tricky game.
It's a good growth lesson for everyone, really.
And when I say BS, not that the people that are actually channeling are actually making it up. They just might be tapping into entities that may not be of the best interest for humanity's evolution.
Or they haven't processed themselves enough, and when the energy comes through, it can distort.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's it. Now, have you come across anybody that, because they're not able to process, are they actually bringing in energies, matching frequencies, so to say? So if their frequency, if their ego is still sort of more involved in that process, do they channel entities with egos that are involved with that? You know,
this is a wonderful...
Or is it them?
Well, this is a wonderful geeky discussion that I really love.
Okay.
But I'm kind of radical on this because it's real easy for people to say, oh, it's a negative entity or it's a positive entity.
Sure.
But I see the human consciousness more of being like a filter, and we attract the same frequency that we're running, basically.
Yeah, that's why I see.
So if you are conspiratorial and you're, you know, into more of the separation thing, then the channeling that is coming through you is going to really reflect those belief systems.
Right.
Whether that's the entity, I'm more inclined to think it's the channel, not the entity. And I'm certainly not pointing any fingers.
Sure.
We all have our own processing that we need to do.
Fascinating. No, that I can see that. So I've been told, you know, and I'll say this, but when my mom was involved in the Ramtha thing, she, you know, it was the idea that that sort of helped her break free from being in that situation was that another entity came through and was doing things that, so the original Ramtha energy that was there in the beginning sort of fell to the side, and then another energy came through that claimed to be the same entity. So I've heard different takes.
I've heard that too.
Yeah. And but I like that take. It seems to make, on a logical, sort of grounded earth level, it seems like that's...
Because if you think about it, you know, those of us that are doing channeling work or any type of spiritual teaching work, even the ancient scriptures, the ancient Hindu scriptures say this, that you get tested and you get very big challenges when you're doing this kind of work. And you basically move to the next level of your evolution if you can move through those challenges with grace and ease.
Sure.
And so the challenges get bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And that's how we grow.
Yeah, and you have to step up to the plate.
Yeah. And the minute we blame other people or other entities, we've lost the point of,
So, you know, the 80s were this epic period of channeling, the research, and then the research sort of stopped in that sense. Have you heard of, I heard in Daryl's new movie, the First Contact movie, that he actually, you know, had somebody hook up the EKG machine to his head. Now, were they doing that back then, or?
Yes, they were just starting to do the EKG work then. But again, even technology at that time
Right.
was very different than
Sure.
it is now.
For sure.
I know that people have been doing the research.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really quote it very well. I haven't read it. But one of the things I do know about that research is that one of the things they found is that, for instance, if I'm sitting here talking to you, my beta brainwave state is more active
Right.
because I'm Lyssa in this physical reality.
Sure.
But if I'm channeling, they found all the different brainwave states heighten. So it's as if the entire brain is in an active and integrative state.
Right.
And actually, I believe Dr. Oz did a show on this. It's on
Oh, he
his
did?
website.
Okay.
And what they found, I can't unfortunately quote the science, but actually the link is still up on his
Okay.
website. But what they found is that the way the brain is firing when a person is doing channeling is it appears there's input coming from outside the person's own brain,
Right.
which is another kind of validation for
Right,
this
right.
type of work.
So I sort of have a theory on channelers. I always tell people, no matter what, there's 50% of, so there's never fully this other entity coming through. There's still, whoever the channeler is there's going to be a 50%.
Yes.
And maybe that, I just pulled that number out, but I sort of
Right.
like to explain to people, because a lot of people get, scared, or
Yes.
they're, oh, this entity's taking over the body,
Yes.
and I said, no,
No.
it's at least 50%. It's an agreement.
Yes.
At least 50% of that person is still in that, is coming through.
Yes.
And then, and then it could be even more depending on, how well
Right.
that person can sort of
Right.
channel that information
Yeah.
through. But at minimum or maximum, you're going to get 50% of
Yeah.
the other person no matter what.
I agree with that. And furthermore, I think a lot of that has to do with the evolutionary process that we're involved with as humans now. Because if you look, for instance, at Edgar Cayce, he would go into like a sleep state.
Right.
And it was a state of separation, really.
Yeah.
That was appropriate for the early days of mediumship and things such as that. But now we're going into the stage of integration as a collective consciousness, as human beings, where we can no longer maintain that state of separation.
Yeah.
In fact, I've come to see that form of channeling is very hard on the body. And so now, in order to kind of make this evolutionary leap, there has to be that partnership
Right.
between the energy and the human. So one of your earlier questions was about how do you integrate it in your daily life?
Right.
And I think that if we're doing our inner work as channels sincerely, that the integration starts happening naturally. And that's how our channeling gets clearer and clearer and deeper and deeper.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. When you channel, do you are you in a trance completely?
Yes, I'm in a trance state.
What are you?
I don't want to say completely because I had training in how to walk and how to drink and things in the channeling state.
Okay.
So you can, if you know Lyssa and then you know the beings I'm channeling, you can see the difference. But after 30-something years now, it's much more fluid. So my eyes are closed.
They are so close. Okay.
But I do get up and draw on the board and things,
Yeah.
and they will use my eyes just slightly like a peep,
Oh, okay.
like almost echolocation, like a dolphin to find the terrain.
Okay.
And then they close my eyes again.
Okay. Fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And over the years, like you said, it does seem what you just said, just to validate that there's less and less trance channeling, deep trance channeling, and more of a what do they call it? Conscious
channeling.
Conscious
Yes.
channeling, where you're sort of there and you can sort of hear all the information
Yeah.
that's there. And is that how do you hear what's going on in the moment, or do you have to go back and rewatch?
The best metaphor that I've used for this is Lyssa's talking to you now, so Lyssa's driving the car.
Right.
But my higher self and the beings are in the back seat. But when I go into the channeling state, Lyssa's going in the back seat,
Right.
and they're driving the car.
Right.
And usually what it feels like for me is I'm sitting in the back seat and I'm looking out the window. But I can hear their conversation
Right.
in the front seat. But the interesting thing is I can have my own experience in the back seat.
Right.
And what is coming out verbally when I'm channeling is about 30% of the download that I'm getting.
Okay.
The download itself cannot be encapsulated in the words. Sometimes it feels like my head's going to explode because it can't all come out.
I see.
But experientially, I have the experience of the download.
Fascinating. I've interviewed other entities that talk about, and then I ask them in the moment, so where's your being? What are you doing right now? And then they're like, well, I'm, having a conversation with my son on my planet, and this, these kinds of things. Yeah. And then at the same time, I'm actually being channeled to at another planet over here, and my consciousness is over there. So a lot's going on.
A lot's going on.
And I guess I love that analogy of the front seat and back seat.
Yeah.
Where you're just letting somebody else. You're there in the car, but you're just letting somebody else drive for a minute.
Yeah. I have to say, though, it does feel for me, I don't know about other channels, my trance state has deepened in the last 6 years.
Okay.
But not deepened in the Edgar Cayce way, the separation way. It's like going deeper into the quantum and still being able to come back, but it's a sense of being deeper.
Okay.
It's really hard to describe.
So maybe you just think you're digesting the information, you're able to process the information a little bit deeper, so you have to go deeper into to get it?
Yes, I think so, because sometimes it's so intense that it's really exhausting, which is usually why I try to have a break when I'm channeling, after an hour or so, just to ground.
Right.
Yeah.
You channel, I've heard you channel several beings. Could you tell us, I know later we'll probably get into some of them, but could you just sort of tell us over the evolution, who came first, how did that all work?
Well, in the 80s, at the very beginning when I started, this is common for everyone. When I teach channeling, I tell my students this. Sometimes at the beginning, it's a lot of different ones. And they might be there for a short period of time, or they might just visit once. The first being I was channeling regularly for about a 3-year period in the 80s was a being called Radia.
Okay.
And she was a consciousness, a collective consciousness mostly associated with Arcturus, the star Arcturus, which is actually one of the simplest energies to channel. It's very easy for humans to tap into that energy. Then in '88, I went through a real shift, and I had more UFO experiences, and that's when Sasha came. Okay. Sasha is the female Pleiadian being I've been channeling since '88, and who also says she's a future incarnation of me.
Right.
But back then, Sasha was very different than Lyssa. Personality-wise, energy-wise, they were like opposite ends of the spectrum. But remembering the theory I was telling you about the channeling process being an integrative one, I've seen that her theories were true, because Sasha and Lyssa have come closer and closer and closer and closer together, to the point now that sometimes when I'm doing contact work outside at night in the dark, it's like Lyssa and Sasha become one, and I don't know where one ends and one begins. Not in a state of schizophrenia, though, however.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But that in a positive way.
In a positive way, right. In an amazingly positive way. That is helping me as a human, I think, become a better human being.
Very good.
So that's Sasha, and her focus tends to be on some people use the term ascension. I don't use that term, but the shift in consciousness that humans are going through. She also is really strong on the whole contact issue, which is her love, and one of the main reasons why she's here.
Awesome.
And then there's another collective. He calls himself, I say he's not a he nor she, collective called Germain, not Saint Germain, spelled Germane, because it's the English word meaning coming from the same source. So that's why he chose that name, to show that he's coming from the same source. Basically, the way to describe his collective is that if our entire galactic family went through their shift, their ascension, moving back to the one, and became a collective, it's the energy of that collective.
And when you say galactic family, are the galactic family that we're sort of familiar with, the Arcturians?
I would say
Pleiades,
mostly
Sirius?
the ones we're familiar with, but many of those we're not familiar with too.
Okay.
Yes. So that energy germane, he says many people tap into it on the planet by different names.
Okay, yeah, because I talked to, interviewed Michaela Sheldon. She channels a group, she described it similarly, it's called the Council of Light, that she, is a collective of collectives, so to say, and it was very galactic.
Yes.
It's,
when you get up there,
yeah.
there's not that many collectives left,
Right,
right? Because everybody's
going
coming
into
together.
source, yeah.
Yes.
And anybody else? I mean, you mentioned, I've heard you channel Calvin, the mantis being, and you mentioned Yael being came through recently.
Yes.
So how does that work? Does it just happen on the fly, or?
It usually happens on the fly. It often happens when I'm doing a contact work in general, because we're focusing on that issue of galactic energies. There's one being who's a Syrian ambassador named Hamon. He's kind of like the bigwig, and when he comes, it's like, everybody shut up.
Oh, wow.
We kind of joke with him,
Right.
but he's very well respected.
Okay.
And he's been working a lot, especially with my students in Japan, about opening the integration of the mental, emotional bodies and moving into the quantum states of consciousness. And then, as you mentioned, there was only once the mantis being, Kelvin, who came during a contact retreat where the temperature dropped about 10 or 15 degrees when he was channeling. And recently, big surprise to me, a Yael being came. In the past, I had channeled Essassani, and I had channeled Bashar. Daryl knows about that. Every once in a while.
Yeah.
But the Essassani energy is unmistakable. So recently there was a woman in the audience who'd asked about the Yael beings, and I could feel, it's hard to describe, but it's like you can feel it coming at you like a torpedo.
Oh, a torpedo, okay.
And especially Essassani hybrid.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the Yael is very similar frequency.
It's very similar frequency. And it was a very short message, but I felt it coming. And again, my training as a channel is to always watch internally my response to the energy. Am I resisting it? If I'm resisting it, relax, let go, surrender. Am I blocking it? Is there fear because I don't want to hear something? We have to constantly always watch our egos. So I'm kind of juggling things in the back seat of the car at the same time. And I'm trained at this point to know that even if I resist it, let go. So eventually I let go and the energy came through. So if you're hearing it, it sounds Essassani in some ways.
Yeah, I've most of the Yael channels that
I didn't know that.
that I've come across with, they use the same 4 or 5 laws of the universe. The Bashar.
Interesting.
They repeat them verbatim all the time. All is the one is the all. You exist. You can't do anything about it. And, what you put in is what you put out. The whole, and everything changes except for those laws. Those things.
Wow. I don't honestly listen to a lot of other channels. Not because I don't want to be tainted, but that's work. For me, so I don't. It's not my relaxing activity to listen to other channels.
And when you have a direct line, why? Especially to all the numerous ones that you seem to be tapping into.
I didn't know other people that channel Yael that it sounds like that. I didn't realize it.
Yeah, very, very similar.
Yeah.
Very similar. I trying to put together a glossary, a thesaurus of encyclopedia of all of the different energies out there, and that's what this series is. So I've been sort of paying attention and looking at the little nuances and trying to find. So the hybrid races, I'm curious to find more about the other hybrid races, because we really only know about the Sassani and the Yael.
There's all kinds.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the contact work we come across, maybe I've channeled them, I don't remember, like a Pleiadian Zeta hybrid or a
Right.
Pleiadian Sirian hybrid.
Right.
Of course, those are just the species we know.
Right. And Treb, from Rob Gauthier, he's a reptilian human hybrid, and created by Palladian human hybrids.
Yeah.
It's like everything's a hybrid.
Yeah.
So let me ask this, and I might ask this later in the channeling as well. But would you say the whole hybridization thing is that part of the process of going back to the oneness?
Spot on.
Okay.
Sasha has said many times that from the human perspective, we're seeing this as, oh my God, we're guinea pigs.
Right.
But she said, what you don't realize is that it's natural.
Right.
Look at, you're Italian.
Yeah.
Speaking of myself, you're Italian, you're Native American, you're a hybrid.
Yeah.
So it's natural.
Right.
It's nothing to worry about.
So on one spectrum, we all separated and are different and created our different species with its unique uniqueness. But on the other end, almost simultaneously, we're all sort of hybridized, coming together.
Yes.
And going back.
And our view of seeing this hybridization happening is the linear view of a human ego. But from the quantum view, we're already
Entangled.
together.
Yeah.
Entangled, exactly. Yeah.
Well, you do a lot of work in Japan, and we've talked about this, and Japan's a dear place in my heart.
Me too.
What do you do out there? How do they? You go out there all the time? Is it 3 times a year, 4 times a year?
Yes, I am out in Japan all the time. I've started there in 1990, and right now the work has really accelerated. It seems that all my new work is birthed in Japan first. I don't necessarily know why, I'm just going with it. But I have a channeling class there that I work with for a whole year, and I give them homework between the segments. So the students are amazing. They're so dedicated and so excited, and they humble me all the time by watching their sincerity. And of course, I do every summer, I do a contact retreat at Mount Fuji, which is one of the highlights for me of the year.
Yeah, it's a powerful spot.
Yeah, and we have a lot of repeat students, so at this point, the energy is really building.
Nice.
And we have amazing contact experiences that happen there. So I do a lot of private sessions, regular workshops, retreats, and of course, the channeling class there.
And do you offer that kind of work here in the States as well?
I do. We have a yearly contact retreat here in Arizona usually, usually in October every year. And I do some private sessions by Skype, but again, because I'm in Japan so much, I have to kind of space things out. So I don't have a lot of space, unfortunately, in the States to do, in my schedule to do work. So here and there.
Here and there. Well, you've written a number of books. If someone wanted to get more familiar with your work, how would you recommend what book to start with? Or
the first book, the classic book, is The Prism of Lyra, which I channeled in 1989. And the reason I channeled that book basically was because in the 80s, I would go into the Bodhi Tree bookstore in Los Angeles.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yes, and I would want channeled information about our galactic family. And there were 0 books on the shelf at that time. And I really was hungry to get the answers to that. So that's why I channeled the information, and never thinking it would be considered such a classic book now at this point. So The Prism of Lyra would be the first book about the galactic family. And that led to, we're still in the 80s now, and the abduction phenomenon was happening. And Whitley Strieber's book had come out, Communion. And to make the story short, I had this experience where even I kind of got sucked into the fear thing about it. And I was living in Los Angeles one day, and I was in the shower, and I was mentally ranting at those guys for taking humans. And suddenly, I had soap all over me, and suddenly the shower shut off, and I received the communications, the water shut off. I received the communication saying, "Do you really want to know our story? We'll tell you."
Oh, okay.
And that became the book Visitors from Within.
And that's from Zeta beings, or?
Yes, from Zeta beings. Bashar has some information in there, and Sasha too, but there are some Zeta beings in there. But it's all about that idea and the bigger picture, rather than the victim and perpetrator idea.
Right.
More about species evolution.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people were getting into the fear. Well,
Exactly.
Whitley too. I mean, his experiences
Yes.
were pretty terrifying.
Exactly.
And then Bud Hopkins.
Yes.
And luckily, John Mack
Yes.
started trying to pull it back to a
Yes.
more positive
Dear John Mack.
direction.
And
but-
what happened, yes. Yes. So then the natural progression is from going from lying in your bed and being taken to the question, can we as humans be active participants in the contact program? And that really became my obsession in the early 90s. So I channeled the book mostly from Sasha, Preparing for Contact, which for me is my favorite book just because I love the subject matter. And the book came out, I think, in late 93 or early 94. And then coincidentally, I met Dr. Stephen Greer at that time, who was just getting going with SETI.
Right.
And through all these synchronicities, I ended up being trained in his protocol and leading groups in his protocol.
Nice.
And those were wonderful years for me. But then I found I needed to go in my own direction because I had the direct line.
Yeah.
And Sasha was giving me protocols and we were doing experiments. So I have tremendous respect for what they've done, but I just took a different path.
Yeah.
So that
But you were sort of in the pioneer group then.
Yeah, back then there were only maybe 3 or 4 working groups in the whole world.
Wow.
It was really exciting.
I just saw on Facebook, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, was like an anniversary for the SETI and what all the work. And there's so many Facebook pages now.
I know.
With all these different people.
To imagine back then that it would be this widespread now,
Yeah.
I could not have imagined it. It's so gratifying to see.
Yeah.
I don't want Dr. Greer's job, that's for
No,
sure.
he definitely he goes out forward, you know, with charging forward.
Yeah.
With everything blazing.
Yes, exactly. That's not my style. So after that, and there's a few books in Japan actually that are not in English.
Oh, okay.
And then the most recent thing though is really exciting for me because I was getting a lot of questions from clients who wanted to know their galactic history. And I would go into the channeling state and I would channel that information, but I found it was like going into a really long tunnel. It was an exhausting process. And every time I would do those types of sessions, I would really be drained.
Now, would that be something like going into the Akashic Records in a way, or is that?
I guess.
So I've heard, some people talk about going into the Akash and finding people's.
I guess
histories,
it because it was more than just the data.
Right.
It was also looking at the bigger, multidimensional quantum picture of how all these lifetimes fit together, and why you're here now, also living that matrix of all of those lifetimes.
Right.
So in 2010, the collective being I channeled called Germaine, gave me the directive, inspired by the company I work for in Japan, who were pushing me to do it, to create a set of cards. We call them the Galactic Heritage cards. And the cards are, it's 108 cards that move from card 1 to card 108, that move from the original separation all the way through the deepest separation and polarity and back to reunification and integration. That's the energy of the deck. So now if I work with people who want that information about their galactic heritage, the cards are a way to kind of jump start it so I don't have to go deep into that tunnel that's so exhausting.
Interesting.
And it's actually led me to go deeper with the galactic heritage information.
This is kind of like a shortcut.
It's a shortcut.
Using the cards.
Like your metaphor, it's the Mac, one click,
yes.
instead of clicking.
Instead
Exactly.
of the PC version.
The PC version, exactly.
several clicks.
Yeah.
Very cool. And in working with so many individuals from Japan in America, do you find a difference in their galactic heritage? Or is there sort of a link up, or is it all just all over the place? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, we as races in our DNA, are we more prone to have a particular galactic family base than, or is it just doesn't matter?
I think it's all over the place, but this is something I was talking to Barbara Lamb about the other night, actually, that she found very surprising, and you might find this really surprising. The perspective about the Zetas from the Japanese is totally different than the Western perspective.
Okay.
Meaning that if I talk about Zetas or channel about Zetas, their heart's open and they love the Zetas. And I started to notice, now that I've been working in Japan for 26 years, I started to notice, why aren't there abduction stories? There are very, very few abduction stories in Japan. And I have theories for this, but these days, when you talk about the Zetas, they are in love with the Zetas. But there's also a lot of cultural similarities in the sense of not showing emotion.
Sure.
So they feel a really strong kinship with the Zetas.
Right.
So it's really
I've always
fascinating.
felt that. I've always felt that more of a kinship. But,
Me too.
But yes, fascinating. When I go there next time, I'm going there in a week, so I'll ask some questions and pay attention to that a little bit more. I wasn't really into, when I lived in Japan, I wasn't into the ET stuff so much. I like science fiction and I liked aliens, but I never, not like now. Now I'm really into it, so.
Unless it's just my group that's like a bubble.
Right.
You know, I don't know. Maybe you'll tell me.
No, I mean, when I was doing the citizen hearing, I reached out to some researchers in Japan to see if they would be interested in being part of the hearings. And during my research and trying to find people, I did notice there was less of a fear-based when it came. A lot of people just laugh it off. The non-believers just sort of laugh it off. But there wasn't the abductee category.
Right.
That it was more of an experiencer category.
Exactly.
So now that you're saying this, I'm thinking about it. I think you're right. So, but I'm going to look into that more.
I'm curious.
Well, look forward to getting to some channeling later and diving into talking to Sasha and whoever else wants to come forward. Thank you for all your work over the years, and just love having you do this, having this opportunity to be able to talk to you in this manner and just to continue to do your work.
And thank you for doing your work, because this is a huge service.
Absolutely.
Without the fear base
Yes.
that you're providing, so thank you.